Alright guys, so now that we have installed the CLI and we've created our application, we've looked at it in the browser with ngserve, now what I want to do is start to look at the framework folders and files that are created for us by the CLI. Alright, so a lot of this stuff is, I'm not going to say not important, but it's not important right now for you to know. And a lot of this stuff is actually has to do with testing, which we're not going to get into because that's beyond the scope of this course. Okay, now this might look pretty intimidating, the folder structure, but if you look in the SRC, which is our source folder, you have an app folder. This is basically your application. This is where all your components will go, your services, your models, anything to do with your core application is going to go in this one folder. So a lot of this other stuff is for development, for testing, for compiling, things that it's not directly related to writing your Angular application. All right, it's related to your environment in general. All right, but with that said, we're still going to go through some of this stuff. So let's start with the root files here. The most important thing here is the package.json file. If you've ever worked with Node.js, then you probably know what this is. It's basically a manifest. It has all your application information like the version, the name, the license, and then it also has any NPM scripts that are included. And you can see all the ng commands here are actually, you can run them as npm scripts as well. For instance, ngserve, which runs our development server, we could also do npm start and it would do the same thing. And I can show you that real quick. If I do npm start, it'll go ahead and just basically run ngserve. It'll build everything out and start our development server. All right, so you can see it's now listening on 4200, which is right here. All right, but I'm going to Control C and stop that. So you have scripts to serve, to build, okay, ng build, testing, linting, end-to-end testing, which again, we're not going to really get into. All right, now for the dependencies, this is where all of the Angular packages are. So Angular is, it's basically comprised of all different packages. Okay, so you have a package for the animations part of it, common, which has a lot of different things in it, the compiler, the core, which also has a lot of different things, the forms module, HTTP. Now, in Angular 5, the standard HTTP module has been deprecated, and the new one is actually included in Angular Common. So in this course, we're going to be dealing with the new one, which is in Common. Okay, the last revision of the course, which was Angular 4 front to back, we used this. In this one, we'll use the new HTTP module. And this platform browser is used to basically manifest your application within the browser. And then, of course, we have the Angular router, so we can create routes. And you can see we're using Angular version 5.0.0. All of these packages have the same version number. And this takes us back to where we talked about Angular 3 and how it never existed, because the router package, the version of it you can see here, did not match the rest, and that would have caused some internal havoc with developers of Angular. So that's why the skip of Angular 3. All right, so let's see, we also have core.js, which includes polyfills for newer standards of ECMAScript, newer features. RxJS, which is reactive extensions. This allows us to use observables and data streams, things like that. Zone.js has to do with zones and change detection. This isn't stuff that you have to fully understand in order to build Angular applications. It's a lot of the stuff that happens behind the scenes. Okay, for dev dependencies, we have the Angular CLI itself, the compiler CLI, anything to do with Jasmine or Karma that has to do with testing. We also, of course, have TypeScript. So TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript that allows us to use static typing, classes, and a bunch of other stuff. We're actually going to have a lecture dedicated to TypeScript to get you more familiar with that. But anyways, that's the package.json file for Angular. Okay, in the root we also have our tsconfig. This is the configuration for TypeScript. So everything that we write in TypeScript gets compiled down to regular JavaScript, and you can see the target is going to be ECMAScript 5, basically the version of JavaScript that has been around for forever and is supported by all browsers. All right, let's see. We also have tslint.json, which is basically an analysis tool that checks TypeScript code for readability and errors and stuff like that. Nothing you really need to mess with. Karma for testing, protractor testing, Angular CLI.json. This is basically the configuration file for the command line interface. From here we can add scripts. So if we want to add Bootstrap or something, we can actually install it with npm, and then we can go ahead and put it in the styles here for the CSS, and then the JavaScript would go in the scripts. And this will get dynamically inserted into our HTML. All right, we can also change, for instance, the output directory. When we do ng build and it builds everything out to static assets, it'll go to a dist folder, but we can change the name of that if we want. We can change the name of our source folder, things like that. Okay, so it's just a basic configuration file. All right, so node modules is obviously all of our node dependencies. No need to even look in there. End-to-end testing, we're not going to get into that. So that leaves us with the source folder, which is the most important folder. And in here, we do have our main app folder, but we have some other stuff as well. So tsconfig, this has to do with TypeScript configuration. We have our main HTML file that loads, which doesn't really have anything in it. It's just a basic boilerplate. The only thing that, or I should say the most important thing here, is this app root directive, or this tag. This is where your Angular application is going to be loaded. Okay, this is where the main app component gets loaded. Now you could put, if you wanted to include Bootstrap or something, you wanted to use the CDN, you could put it in here, but I think it's better practice to use the Angular CLI file, because that will automatically put it in here without you having to touch the HTML. Okay, so that brings us to the JavaScript now. Now notice how these files have a TS extension. TS stands for TypeScript. That's what we're using with Angular. So you're not going to see too many JS files when it comes to your components and stuff like that. It's going to be all TS, which then gets compiled down to JS, down to JavaScript. So the main.ts file is basically our entry point. I don't want to go too much into the actual code in this video, but just to show you here, this is loading something called the app module, which is the core module of our Angular application, and it's getting bootstrapped here. So this is like just the entry point of Angular. Okay, it's also loading this platform browser. This has to do with loading it into the browser. And it's also loading our environment file, which you can see we have an environments folder with two different files. One is environment.ts, one is environmentprod.ts. So the prod is for production. So this is where you would put variables like you'll see when we get into our Firebase project. Firebase has certain API keys and things like that that you need to store. So this is where you would put stuff like that. Now, a lot of times you may have, let's say, a development database and a production database with two different API keys. So you'd want to separate those into production and development files, okay, or variables. And this is where that stuff would go. So from the main.ts, we're loading the app module. And if we look in our app folder, you'll see a file called app.module.ts. So this is where that app module is. You can see there's a class called app module. We also have this @ng module. Now, the purpose of ng module is to declare everything you create. So every time we create a new component or a service or another module, that we would bring it into this file and we would include it into our ng module. Now you can see, as I said before, every Angular application has a core app component or a root app component, and that's already been created for us. And you can see that we're importing it here, and then we're adding it to the declarations. So the declarations array holds all of the components we create. So if we create a users component in the app folder, we'll import that here and we'll add it to the declarations. Okay, when you have a module, like let's say the browser module, which handles loading your application in the browser, you can see that that's being brought in. That's actually put in the imports array. Okay, so modules will go here, components here, modules here. Now, if you have a service, and I know a lot of you guys don't know what a service and all this stuff is yet, but we'll get to that. I'm just saying, if you have a service, let's say that connects to an outside API, you would import that service here, and that would go into the providers. Okay, so again, components, modules, services, or providers. And then Bootstrap is just basically what component you want to bootstrap. In this case, and in most cases, it's going to be your core app component. So you're not going to really add anything to this Bootstrap array. It's basically just these three that you'll bring stuff in and then you'll load it here. Okay, it's basically just a meeting place for your application. Okay, and then all your components will also go in the app folder. And you can see this is the root app component. I'm not going to really go over this code right now because I want to go over it when we get to components. But just know that your TS file is your main component file. You can see there's a couple different types of files here. The spec, this has to do with testing. We're not going to really get into that. We don't even need to create a spec file for our custom components. The HTML is the template. This is actually what you're seeing when we load our application. Remember, it said welcome to app. This is string interpolation. I'll get into that in the next section. And then we have a CSS file that's specific to this app component. Okay, so you don't need to have all of these different files here. You could actually just do with the one TS file. You could even include your template, your HTML inside of this, inside of right here. But it's good to have it in a separate file to keep things just separated. But that's pretty much it. We also have an assets folder for things like images and local assets. But that's an Angular application. Okay, there's not too much else here that is really going to be important to you at this point. All right, so I really hope that I've made it clear on kind of how this works. And just to reiterate, we have the main.ts, which is that's our entry point. This loads app module, which is in our app folder in the app.module.ts. This brings in all of our components, services, any other modules we're using, puts it inside of ng module, and then the main app component gets bootstrapped, which is this component here. Okay, and this component is loading this HTML file. That's the basics of what's going on when we go ahead and we run ng serve. So we'll just run that real quick. And 4200 should work as soon as this is done. And there it is. So this is the main app component. You can even see right here, welcome to, and like I said, this app is actually dynamic. That's what you're seeing here in title. But we have the image. This is the image you're seeing, all the text that's underneath it. Everything is being shown in the main app component. All right, so we're going to go ahead and stop here, guys. And before we get to the next section where we start building components and taking a closer look, I just want to talk a little bit about TypeScript and what that is, because TypeScript is actually a big part of Angular. All right, so hope this wasn't too long, guys. I just wanted to try and fully explain everything, and I will see you in the next video.